as Signy just mentioned, I'm talking about how the early 20th century fires, what their fates were, and then also what the fuel and forest structure of the different fire histories in those fires look like today. So high severity fire is a really relevant and important topic right now. We have had an increase in the amount of fire on the landscape in recent years, and also an increase in the amount of high severity fire in recent years. And so to gain greater understanding of the legacy of these fires today, we can look at past high severity fires and what they currently look like to help us understand the future of our forests. And this is a picture from an early 20th century fire, the 1910 fire, the Big Burn, which created a lot of high severity fire across the landscape in the early 20th century. And it occurred, there was multiple regional fire years during that time period, which you can see here in this figure: 1910, 1919, 1926, 1929, and 1931, and 1934. And these all were regional fire years that occurred in the warm and dry period. And it's interesting to look at these fires because in this time period, this was prior to a lot of suppression, prior to a lot of land use change, such as like logging and development and so forth. And it also was prior to the policy change in 1935, which was the 10 a.m. policy, which was trying to get fires out by 10 a.m. the next day. So this was a more intact fire regime, and there was still a lot of high severity fire at a large scale in this region. So what do those fires look like now? What has happened to them? And we're going to go through like a little case study of one particular area. So this is the Elbow Bend, which is in the middle of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. And you can see this kind of brush field here is the fire perimeter of a fire that burned at high severity in 1910. And this is a picture from 1939 of that area. And this is what the different fire histories look like overlaid on top of that area. So an area that had burned once is yellow, an area that had burned twice is orange, and an area that has burned 3 times is blue. And this area here, this yellow and this orange and this blue, all burned in 1910. And so just for frame of reference, again, you can kind of see that fire perimeter all through here in setback succession. And so without any fires occurring, this is what that area looked like in 1998. And so you can see that regeneration, reforestation of those areas that burned. Trees were able to come in and succession was able to progress. Then in 1999, a reburn occurred in this orange area and in this blue area. And so you can see here where that kind of opened up the canopy area and a lot of canopy cover in a lot of areas, and just created this disturbance here. And then in 2015, there was a third fire in this area. So you can see in this blue here, and then this area, which was long unburned prior in our fire history data set, then burned. And that's just for reference. It's not part of like this study, but you can see again, this is where that 3 times burned occurred. So this gets us to wondering what the fates of those early 20th century fires are with these different fire histories. So those areas that haven't burned since, those areas that have burned once, and those areas that have burned twice since that original early 20th century fire. What does their forest structure and composition look like? What does that tree regeneration look like? And what is the fuel look like in those 3 different fire histories? And so this is what we were thinking would occur with the high severity fire resetting succession for a structural variable such as basal area. It would decrease, and then it would regenerate, it would regrow back, succession would occur, and then if it had burned a second time, and then if it had burned a third time, and so there would be this difference between the three fire histories and what these different structural or different variables would look like. And so why are we looking at the Selway? The Selway is a fantastic place to look at high severity fire because there has been so much of it. We also have an extensive fire history data set that goes back to the 1870s that I'm going to elaborate more on. And also, being in a wilderness setting, there's less suppression, there's less roads, and there's been less land use change, which leads to a more intact fire regime. And so to give you a sense, those early 20th century fires burned 24% of the total Selway Bitterroot Wilderness area. Of that area, 7% reburned, so 7%. And then of that area, 0.7% reburned of all of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness at twice and then 3 times burned in the fire years that we were interested in. And then to deal with variability and to reduce variation, we masked using Landfire, the existing vegetation type data set, to be a mid-elevation mixed conifer area, and these tended to be Abies grandis dominated forests. And so when masking by years and when masking by vegetation type, we ended up only being able to look at 2 high severity fires in our years, regional fire years. So 1910, in here you can see again the same color coding that I'm using throughout the presentation. That once burned is that all that yellow area, and then orange is twice burned, and blue is 3 times burned. And you can see that this created across the Selway those 1910 burns. And the other fire year that we're looking at is the 1934. And so you can see similarly the fire history that occurred in those areas that burned at that time periods. Yeah, so to understand how we were able to get there, we created a fire history data set so that we could look back and know what had burned at what time periods. And so we used one data set by Pat Green, which was going from 1870 to 2000, and then a different data set from 1972 to 2015 that we added on using the same methods. And we had to cross-reference and kind of crosswalk the data sets so that we had what was high severity in the same fire perimeter in one data set meant the same thing in the other data set. So I'm going to go through a little bit of how we were able to take those two things to do that. The green data set was using aerial imagery and was determining fire severity by the percent mortality of overstory trees. And then the parks data set was using satellite imagery and then multispectral satellite imagery to then determine severity that way. So they would both mean the same thing. We calculated the severity using CDI or using satellite imagery, and going off of the percent mortality that the green data set determined, which was 70% for high severity or greater, and then 20 to 70 for moderate, and then less than 30% for low. But we're really just focusing on high severity fire. And so for that to look the same, it would be a 2 for CBI is what would be considered a like high severity using that metric. And this is a histogram created from that overlap in time period, what was considered high severity in the green data set, and then calculating CBI. And you can see that almost all of the pixels in those high severity polygons that were hand delineated by percent mortality in that aerial imagery in that historical data set are over 2 in the CBI. So that gives us a lot of confidence in that historical data set. And so using those same methods, so this method on the left is determining the severity by CBI, and then whatever was over 2 created these, the gray, which was high severity, and green was low severity. And then this, the green data set was that hand delineated. So using the 2 different methods, we're still able to get really, really similar patch sizes and really high confidence that our severity is correct. And I'm so sorry that I totally messed up. Green is high severity and gray is non-high severity, and I just mixed up my words there, so I apologize. Then to make sure that we were going to the right spots in the actual field sampling, we did 120 meter buffer so that to reduce potential errors when like navigating or with projection or whatnot. So that is the difference between A and E. So digging into the experimental design now, as I previously mentioned, we're doing that first perimeter is that high severity first burn that occurred initially in 1910 or 1934. And then we had a reburn within that initial fire perimeter, and that's that one-time burn. And then another one overlaid on top of that is that third time burn. And we're sampling in that yellow, that orange, and that blue to look at the differences. And so this is where all of the plots were. There were 81 plots in 9 of those like little circles, that yellow, orange, and blue situation, which I call blocks. And you can see that they're all in that around a 23-kilometer radius around where our base camp was for that summer. And so it looks like, wow, you're not really sampling a whole lot, but in the wilderness, on the other side, you can see those were 2 of our crew members getting to the plots. So it is hard to get to a lot of plots in a wilderness setting. And this is just some variations and different examples of what once burned plots looked like. And so these are actual pictures from the sites that we visited. And then similarly, this is those twice burned and what they look like. And then on the bottom, those are all of the different fire years that the second reburn occurred in, or the first reburn, the second fire. And this is the third time burn and what those different plots looked like. And then in the blue, those are the fire years for those areas that have burned 3 times. So now I'm going to dig into some of our results that we have for forest structure. And this is live tree basal area. And so you can see that live tree basal area is a lot higher in that one-time burn, and then it steps down with fire frequency. So more fire frequency, less basal area. And this is the predictive plots, and you can see that this occurred, those 3 times burns, it matches that higher, and then in that once burned, and then less high in the second burn and lowest in the third. And across heat load, which was an important biophysical variable, where 0 represents an area that has less solar radiation. It's like less steep, maybe a north-facing aspect. And then that one is that steep southwest-facing aspects. And this is the tree density, so diameter distribution across them. And you can see that of that basal area, a lot of it is in those small trees, the 0 to 10. And so there are a lot of small trees across all three, but there's, you know, more, I'd say, of those higher DBH diameter at rest height trees in the reburns a little. And this is snags or dead basal area, and it has an inverse effect to the live tree basal area. So the least amount in that one-time burn, and then even more in the 3-time burn. So and you can see the same thing. It's just a reverse in that predictive plot across the 3 burns. Oh, gosh, that's not good. Okay. And then for regeneration, it was not limited at all by seed source. So in 99% of all of the plots were within 200 meters of a seed tree, and you can see that that's even more so the case with the one-time burn. But if you look at 3 times burn, only really like 1 or 2 plots were really far away from a seed source. So that is not a limiting factor in the Selway. Abies grandis, as I previously mentioned, is really dominating across all 3. And there's more of that, the Pseudosugum and ZZI in the reburns compared to one-time burn, and I'll get into that further. There's a very small amount of Picea ingomani, Pinus ponderosa, and Thuja plicata in all of the burn histories. So this is the total number of seedlings. It's on a log transformed axis, and there is more seedlings in the reburns compared to the areas that haven't burned since the early 20th century. So that is, I think, a really interesting finding of ours. And then for the Abies grandis and the Pseudosugum and ZZI, the Pseudosugum and ZZI is acting as an early cereal species in this ecosystem, and the Abies grandis is more of a later cereal species. So Abies grandis is able to regenerate in those areas that have higher duff and litter loads and lower higher canopy cover, and then the Pseudosugum and ZZI is doing better in those lower litter and duff areas and that lower canopy cover. So digging into fuel, this is the duff, and it's stepwise down where more fire, there's less stuff, and that's not surprising, minus this one extreme outlier. And this is litter, which has a really similar relationship, matching the duff and higher litter in those areas that haven't burned for a long time, and lower for those areas that have reburned, and even lower for those areas that have reburned twice. This is the coarse woody material. And so coarse woody material is more impacted by the recent fire rather than frequency of fire. So having a long unburned site had lower coarse woody material, and then really similar amounts of coarse woody material across that second and third burn. And that's even more obvious in this coarse woody material, the predictive plot. So really there's a big departure from that one-time burn, and then the different reburns, both the second and third time burn, have a similar amount of coarse woody material. This is the herbs And so very similar across all three burn histories. And similarly, shrubs are pretty similar across all three burn histories, but they're really impacted by forest structure and also biophysical variables. So I'm going to dig a little bit more into that. So there's a lot going on in this plot, so bear with me as I explain it. But we have live tree basal area on the y-axis, where a 0 or low value is a small amount of trees or small trees. And then higher up, the 60 to 80 range, that's a lot of trees or some very large trees on that plot. And then heat load I described earlier. So the less steep north facing aspect is those low areas, and then that steeper southwest facing aspects are those higher heat loads. The fire frequency is color coded as have all of the plots. So yellow, orange, and blue, 1, 2, and 3. And then the amount of shrubs is that size. And so what's really interesting here is that the shrubs are occurring in that high heat load, lower basal area situations. And so that just means that in the higher basal area, there's not as much, they're getting shaded out, which is not surprising, but they're really only thriving regardless of fire frequency in those higher heat load areas. And there's a lot of like mixture of having some trees and some shrubs in this area. And then there are some areas that have no trees that have potentially, become a shrub dominated plot for the foreseeable future. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of a principal component analysis. And so for those of you who are not familiar, principal component analyses, the dimension 1 represents the most amount of, explains the most amount of variation in the data set, and then the dimension 2 is the second most amount of variation occurring. And the color coding remains the same. So once, twice, and 3 times burned is going to match those plots, the fire histories. And so there's a lot going on here, but essentially what the dimension 1 is representing is fire resistance or sensitivity to burn history. And then dimension 2 is kind of a life form dominance. So you have the herbs and shrubs down here, and then live tree basal area, live tree, and trees and stuff up here. And then as you can see, like the fire histories are kind of across this, this x-axis, and the one-time burn is very far away spatially from that second and third time burn, and they're pretty close together. So to go over kind of what we've talked about, forest structure with increasing fire frequency, there is decreasing live tree basal area and increasing snag or dead tree basal area. Coarse woody material is more affected by how recent that reburn was rather than the fire history. So there's less differences between that second and third fire. Regeneration is abundant across all burn histories, and nearby seed sources are super common, and it's pretty rare to be outside of that 200-meter range. Pseudosugum and zizii tends to be an early cereal species, and Abies grandis tends to be a later cereal species. Live fuels are impacted more by forest structure and biophysical factors, and ground fuels are more impacted by, well, fire frequency, and they decrease with fire frequency. I just want to reiterate that I think that these historical events can help us determine the future fates of the current fires and also help inform future actions. So I hope that this research is able to help managers determine treatments and help policymakers who are interested in that high severity fire. And so with that, thank you so much for your interest, and I'm ready to take questions.
All right, thanks so much, Melissa, for that presentation. Again, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. I'll give everyone a moment to type in any questions if they have them. And to get things started, I have a question for you. I was surprised to not see much of a difference between coarse woody material on the ground between the second and third burn. And also, I'm thinking back on your plot, I can't remember exactly if there was more in those plots that had burned twice versus just one time. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that or any reflections from the field.
Yeah, I regret going back all the way to it, but I think that because the initial pulse of mortality is, I mean, slightly delayed, but is what is causing that coarse woody material on the ground. I mean, I'm surprised by it too, but I think that maybe that initial pulse of mortality, then some trees are able to grow back potentially depending on the fire history, and then another fire comes through. I think that that third time burn, depending on, might not create a whole lot more coarse woody material because it might not lead to a lot more mortality, depending on the fire history. And I think there is like a lot of variation. And then, so I'm also find it really interesting, and yeah, I think that's all I really have to say on that.
Awesome, thanks. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box. Maybe I'm missing them, but it looks like you may have gotten off easy. So we'll give everyone else another minute to frame any questions. And if not, then we can go ahead and get going. And feel free, any participants, if you have questions following the webinar, feel free to email me and I can get you in touch with Melissa as well. I'm also going to put up a past event page. Oh, Sean has a question and he cannot unmute. So Sean, can you go ahead and type that in the chat box? And I'm also going to type a link to the past event page for this webinar so you guys can access the recording later. And the link will also be emailed to you in the next few days. So Sean needs a minute to type his question, and then I see something here in the meantime from another participant. So Melissa, did you see or do you anticipate changes in plant associations or tree species as our climate changes?
That is a great question. And I think a little bit outside of the scope of what we were studying, but I think that going off of what we're seeing with regeneration and what we were seeing with the amount of with the reburns and regeneration, that maybe with more fires and like hotter and drier temperatures, we might be seeing more of the like Pseudosugum and ZZI compared to the Abies grandis. But I think that something that was would need like further study.
All right, thanks. Okay, we have another question from Sean. Do you think there's any conflation with time since fire and number of times burned in the results? Like the once burned occurred in early 1900s and 3 times burned, the fire was recent. And he also said great presentation.
Yeah, I looked at the correlation of variables, and time since I did create is like one of the variables, and it was very highly correlated with the number of times burned. So I, in the modeling, didn't account for that variable, and so I think there is a huge, there is like a conflation, and there's high correlation. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Melissa. Unless there are any other questions, please type them quickly. We'll go ahead and, oh, we have one more. I knew if I stalled long enough, we'd get some ones coming in. Okay, so in the multiple burn plots, can you speak to whether the regenerating trees were principally from the most recent fire, or was there a mix of regenerating trees from multiple fires?
That's a great question, and we weren't aging the trees, but in the reburns, there were definitely like multi-age stands, I would say, but because we weren't coring the trees, you know, it's hard to tell how old a tree is, or whether or not it's just like slow growing. But there were like saplings in some plots, and then there were also like young trees in those burns, and the second and third burn do have like obviously a lot more regeneration. So hopefully if those survive, that will lead to a multi-aged cohort.
All right, thanks. Another question. Apparently Western larch did not show up on your study plots, or did so at a very low frequency. During your travels in the study area, do you have any observations or trends that you could share on the natural regeneration of Western larch in the Selway Bitterroot?
Yeah, there just was not a whole lot of Western larch in that area that we were in the Selway. And I mean, I'm not entirely sure why, but it's just, they were not growing there. And I don't necessarily have a good reason for that.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last chance for any questions. And thanks so much, Melissa, for the presentation and for being here today to all the participants. We hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. And there will be a survey that pops up when you close out.